Madam President. Honourable members of the Parliament, let me start by expressing my thanks to all of you for this opportunity to discuss with you the very important and sensitive issue of trafficking in human beings. The European Parliament has been a strong and consistent supporter of our efforts to deal with this odious and appalling crime. It is a crime that takes advantage of the vulnerability and exploits the desperation of people in need of protection and support. As you know, trafficking was and remains a priority for us, as reflected both in the European agenda for migration and of security. Europe has globally a leading role in this field. We have developed a coherent and coordinated legal and policy framework to address trafficking in human beings. The Anti-Trafficking Directive and the 2012-2016 EU strategy has been our main instruments to develop, coordinate and implement our policy framework priorities. Having delivered on the vast majority of actions envisaged in this strategy, we do not feel that our job is done. Quite the opposite. We cannot accept that, irrespectively of origin, there are still, and unfortunately, more children, women, vulnerable people trafficked, abused and exploited. These are victims of the immoral and inhuman profit-making phase of our societies. Now that the 2012-2016 strategy has come to an end, the time has come to step up our efforts and continue delivering more intensively and in a more focused way. To this end, the support and contribution of this House, of all of you, is of utmost importance. The migration crisis and transnational security threats render people more vulnerable to criminal networks and exploitation. That is why more needs to be done. To target the organised criminal networks and follow the money throughout the trafficking chain. To focus more on the prevention, better identification and protection of victims. To further strengthen the coordination at EU level and to ensure more coherence in the external and internal dimensions of our anti-trafficking policy. Criminal networks target and exploit the most vulnerable ones. Recent data indicate that the vast majority of victims are female and children. The most widespread form of exploitation is sexual exploitation, with mainly women and young girls as victims. That is why the Anti-Trafficking Directive has a strong gender-specific dimension, and that is why we have also commissioned a study on the gender dimensions of trafficking in human beings. It is also of major importance to increase our cooperation with third countries and further streamline our anti-trafficking priorities in the external dimension of our policies. Dear colleagues, the two distinct notions of trafficking and smuggling are being often confused. However, it is not only a matter of correct use of terminology. It is also about ensuring a victim-centred and human rights-based approach. Allow me to clarify here that smuggling is a cross-border activity, while trafficking can also take place within the borders of a state. In smuggling, there is consent of the smuggled person, while in trafficking, there is not. The exploitation of the vulnerable victim for profit making is an essential element in trafficking. These differences bear significant implications for the rights of the victims of trafficking and the respective obligations of Member States. I would like to assure you that the respective EU legislative frameworks on smuggling and trafficking will remain clear and consistent in any future policy initiative. Regarding now the two reports based on the Anti-Trafficking Directive presented by the Commission last December, we will continue to proactively monitor the situation in the Member States and examine potential options. To conclude, and as far as our next steps are concerned, we are currently taking stock of the experience and achievements of the current strategy, examining trends and problems, and assessing and discussing with stakeholders what future actions from all the different policy areas are needed. Our aim is to address the challenges created by the changing socio-political context. But we also want to maintain a coordinated, coherent and constant approach and the continuation of the efforts to fight the extremely pernicious but highly lucrative form of crime. The reflections and contributions of this House are of great importance for our work, and I'm looking forward with particular interest to our discussion today. Thank you. Dear colleagues, thank you indeed for this very constructive and interesting debate. I also thank you for your support to keep the fight against trafficking in human beings high on the political agenda. The questions you raised today, the economic and financial aspects, the gender dimension and the coherence between the internal and external dimension will fuel the developments of a new comprehensive EU anti-trafficking policy. It will certainly take due account of the actual and worrisome trends in Europe. Ms. Wikström, trafficking existed prior to the migration crisis. It's not something new. But there is evidence that the current challenges have exacerbated vulnerabilities. And I agree about the attention that has to be given to children. They represent 15% of the victims. Mr. Panzeri, in order to ensure policy coherence, it is important to take into account the latest deliverables. The first progress report on fight against trafficking in human beings. The two reports of the Anti-Trafficking Directive delivered last September. We also take into account the targeted consultation with all relevant stakeholders. The internal Commission processes are ongoing to ensure the best possible outcome for a future policy. Mr. Urtasun, indeed, according to the latest data for the European Union indicate that sexual exploitation is the most prevalent form of exploitation. It concerns 67% of the victims, with 95% being women and girls. The external dimension has been an integral part of the EU policy to address trafficking in human beings and constitutes one of its pillars, and it will continue to be so. Let me assure you once again that the Commission monitors the process in Member States towards full transposition of the Directive on Anti-Trafficking. We will take all necessary steps to ensure full compliance with it. Let me sign off, let me conclude by saying that the fight against the trafficking in human beings is an imperative for the European Union to continue its struggle against the scrupulous criminals. Be sure that we are going to do our best in order to do all necessary movements, take all necessary initiatives in the future, engaging all Member States in order to fulfil this commitment. Thank you.